So wine is just grape juice, right? And grapes are a fruit. So why is it that most wine is not vegan nor vegetarian? And let me tell you, I know there's a little understanding that a few wines are not necessarily vegetarian or vegan friendly, but I think people really underestimate just how many it is. Because in reality, it's the majority of which. So if you are vegan or vegetarian and you enjoy a nice glass of wine, chances are you're having something that is not within your dietary requirements. And to understand why, we first need an understanding of the winemaking process. Now, I've done loads of resources on this, which I will link, so I'm not going to get into it too much. But basically, you're taking grapes, you're crushing them, you're extracting the juice, you're going to add yeast into that juice, and that's going to ferment and create wine. Now, during this fermentation process, the yeast creates proteins which make the wine hazy. And then once the yeast die, they sink to the bottom and they create this kind of little white flake-like thing. And this isn't something that most people enjoy. I mean, I know from personal experience of working in a bar, today we're seeing a lot more cloudier wines and wines that haven't been clarified. Anytime I serve one of these to people, chances are they're going to bring it back and they're going to say, oh, there's bits floating in my wine. Oh, I've got a dirty glass. Oh, I've got cloudy. My wine has gone cloudy. There's something wrong with it. It's not right. People, they just don't like it. The fact is, it's completely safe to drink the dead yeast. It's completely safe to have cloudy wine. There's nothing wrong with it at all. In fact, it just creates a kind of biscuity flavour, which is quite nice. But the majority of people don't like this. What they want to see is crystal clear wine. They want to hold up a bottle and be able to see right through the wine. So to do that, the wine needs to go through a second process, a process we call fining. It's clarifying the wine, and this is what makes wine non-vegan and non-vegetarian. There's a bunch of ways you can clarify wine, there's a bunch of ways you can add fining agents to it. I'm going to tell you what those are now because some of them are really interesting. The first one is egg whites. So with egg whites, you take a big barrel of wine, you add the egg whites in. Now the proteins from the egg white attract the proteins in the wine, and it's those proteins that make wine clouder. So when they attract it, kind of like a magnet of proteins, it clears and clarifies the wine. Then that egg white is removed. So technically speaking, there is no egg white in the end product, which is an interesting debate. Can you drink it? Can you not? Technically it's not in there, but it has been in there in its life form. Another process is milk. It works much the same way. Proteins in the milk attract the protein in the wine, which makes it hazy. That gets then skimmed off, and what we have is clarified wine. And that is a process that we call casein. Now both those ways are both vegetarian friendly, milk and eggs, but not vegan. The third one is gelatin, which is made from animal bones and animal hides. And the way this works is when you add the gelatin sinks to the bottom. And as it sinks to the bottom of a tank, it pulls down all the heavy bits that are in the liquid, that are in the wine. And the heavy bits are what hold the colour and what hold the dead yeast. So once it sinks to the bottom, it takes all that with it. You skim it off the top, you got clear wine. Similar to gelatin is something called isinglass. Now, isinglass has the coolest name of all these fining agents, but it's probably one of the worst ones. Isinglass is fish bladder, which works the same way as gelatin, but instead of made out of animal bones and hides, it's made out of fish bladders. Last but not least, one that's not used that often, but we still see it, is something called Chitosan, which is crustaceans, things like crabs and prawns. They use that, once again, to drag out all the heavy bits in the wine, which is where the colour is held. Now what's very interesting about this is wine labels do not have to mention if they're non-vegan or non-vegetarian. And there's a couple of reasons why they don't have to do it. Firstly, wine is regulated different depending on where you're from. And wine comes from so many different countries and is imported into so many separate countries. It's really hard to keep on top of regulation. And the wine industry just hasn't caught up to the fact that a lot of people today are vegetarian and are vegan. Another reason is because technically it's not in there. So if you had an ingredient list, It's not in there because it's not in the end product. Like what we spoke about with gelatin and the egg whites, they go in to clarify and then they get taken out. A similar thing to this would be if I made you a vegetarian burger, but I cooked the burger on a grill which I cook steak on. I don't have to mention at the end in the ingredients that, hey, this has got mushrooms in, walnuts, peppers, oh, and it's got steak, because technically it's not in there. So how can you tell if a wine is vegan or vegetarian friendly? Well, even though wines don't have to declare whether or not they are, wines that are vegan and are vegetarian will generally put that on the label anyway as a kind of point of sale, a little unique point of sale, they'll stick that on there. So you just check the back of the label and you'll be able to see if it doesn't say vegan or vegetarian, chances are that it's not, but if it does say it, well then you know, yes, it is. Another thing you could do is just drink more natural wines. Natural wines tend not to use fining agents, not all of them do. Be careful with organic wines and natural wines. I wrote a whole article about this, which I will link, where once again we see the wine industry is not that regulated and the rules for putting on things like natural wine and organic wine don't necessarily mean anything. And really what you want to be doing is looking for a cloudier wine or looking for a wine with sediment in it, because then you know that it's not had any fining, they've not used fining agents. And with that being said, if you are vegan or vegetarian and you've been drinking wine without knowing whether or not it's vegan or vegetarian, why change now? You know, you're still doing it. You can still go out there and proudly call yourself vegetarian. I personally have been vegetarian for about 20 years. I drink whatever wine I want. I don't care whether or not it is vegan or vegetarian. It's not something that personally bothers me, yet I'm still calling myself vegetarian. Naysayers might say, no, you're not, but don't worry, you just do you. Enjoy yourself.